They called her many names and whispers, a witch, avenger, the woman with the ember eyes. The records, when they existed, preferred silence. In 1716, somewhere beyond the plazas and cathedrals of Lima, a sequence of events fractured an order that had grown fat on other people's labor. 14 wealthy planters disappeared into a single, terrible night, and the rumor that traveled from cabin to alley said it was Esperanza who closed the furnace doors. Official ink denied the story. Oral memory guarded it. This is not a tidy tale of heroism or villainy. It is an account of how power, desperation, and a single choice can ignite a city's conscience. Listen close. The embers leave marks we cannot easily scrub away. Lima in 1716 wore a respectable face. Spanish stone carved balconies, the cathedral bells that measured life by their toll. Commerce and ceremony moved through plazas as if the world fit neatly into ledger lines. But the ledger had blank margins, plantations on the outskirts, laborers who departed at dawn and returned at dusk with tired eyes, servant corridors behind the grand houses where truth was kept soft and private. Power in the colony relied on silence. Silence about debts, silence about beatings, silence about those who worked the land that fed the market stalls. In that silence, resentments accrued like soot on a hearth, unseen, stubborn and ready to flare. Esperanza's life was ordinary in the ways that matter. She was born in a humble house, the child of those who worked with their hands. Locals remembered a woman heighted more by her presence than by her stature, quick hands, steady eyes, and an unusual habit of humming softly while she worked. She married, or perhaps she was bound by custom to a sort of household role. Records do not agree. What survives in memory are fragments. A neighbor's note about a woman who moved quietly through the kitchen but whose laughter could rise like a bell. An overseer's ledger that lists her name without comment, and late whispers that she once returned a favor by saving a child's arm from an infection with improvised dressings and an old remedy learned from elders. These small acts embroidered a different story into the fabric of the town, and one of competence that unsettled the people who felt entitled to order everything. Planters in the region were men of influence. Their houses rose on river terraces, and their names found place in official correspondence. Their wealth was measured in land and human labor. The furnace that would shape the rumor was ordinary in its function, part of an industrial routine used for blacksmithing, charcoal processing, or for sugar and other agricultural processing in some estates. Furnaces were both tools and symbols, instruments of work, and reminders that heat could transform material into something else. When those who controlled the furnaces were unaccountable, heat could become an instrument of erasure. It is within this ordinary tool on the kitchen hearth, the production furnace, and that our central terrible event took place. Before catastrophe arrives, history often records many small violences. Men who grew fat on production ordered more labor. A field overseer punished an error with blows. A family denied a widow's petition for relief. Esperanza saw these things. She also witnessed how the legal system turned a blind eye. Petitions misplaced. Testimonies coldly dismissed. People began to speak in narrower tones. Warnings to avoid certain houses. A friend's quiet exile after a dispute. A child's unexplained mark. Resentment hardened into resolve among some. Among others, it was merely a whispered prayer. It only takes one point of ignition to start a fire in a dry house. We cannot know the exact hour when a person decides to act. For Esperanza, the decision seems to grow, like a slow coal on oxygen fed by every dismissed plea and every unrecorded injury. It was not a tantrum or a sudden derangement. Family stories suggest careful thought, small experiments in timing, observation of patrols and seasons. She walked the paths at dusk, noted when gates were unlatching, and cataloged the patterns of the planters' comings and goings. The story that remains is not of one woman who sought spectacle. It is of one who sought symmetry, a measurement she thought matched the scale of the injustice she had seen. On a humid night, when lanterns swung low and the air smelled of coal and river, the first action took place. Accounts differ in detail. Some say a small party of planters gathered at a remote production house for late business. Others say they met to discuss local affairs over wine. What the witnesses agree upon is the furnace. Late that night, flames climbed higher than normal, and a sound like a heavy iron door closed. When the planters did not emerge, someone went to look. A manager reported a failure of the ventilation system and a sudden suffocation. It was a tidy explanation for a town uneasy about scandal. Yet others, those who worked the night shifts, later dared to say what they had not the courage to say before, that the furnace had been used in a way not meant for coal, but for silence itself. The details must be handled with care. We describe method without spectacle, implication without gore, a tool turned into a means of erasure. If one night could be attributed to accident or misfortune, a second night woven the pattern into intention. Over weeks, similar incidents occurred at remote estates, sudden fires blamed on faulty stoking, on carelessness, on fate. On the margins of official reports, the same phrase crept in. Suffocation, found in kiln. Families accepted the official verdicts with quiet rage or weary resignation. Those who had few records of power found ways to keep tales alive. A lullaby with new lines. A kitchen gossip thread extended into the next generation. Rumor, once started, is not easily pinned to a single person. But in taverns and on riverbanks, the name Esperanza began to travel with it. Local authorities were slow to act. The planters were people of standing and inquiry, risked social unease. But at last pressure mounted, family members insisted, a few servants whispered accounts. A persistent clerk filed a complaint. Investigators toured yards, interviewed laborers, and inspected furnaces. They recorded plausible technical causes, and the inquest returned formal conclusions that did not satisfy the bereaved. An uneasy truth remained. Systems of power sometimes prefer tidy, mechanical explanations to the messy truth of social rupture. The official record reads like a fragile treaty between order and fear. As weeks turned into months, the events took on the texture of legend. Stories passed from hand to hand, adding color but seldom altering the deep moral that those with power had been taught to fear the smallest among them. Esperanza's actions, whether procedural, panicked, or premeditated, were woven into tales that sometimes painted her monstrous, sometimes messianic. Children were told different warnings, some to behave, others to remember the costs of silence. We must be careful. Memory is a field where fact and meaning wrestle. For historians, it is both a resource and a trap. Accounts differ widely about the end game. Some versions claim betrayal by a neighbor seeking mercy. Others propose an act of bravery by a co-conspirator who turned evidence to save kin. A third set of accounts maintains that Esperanza fled under cover of night and vanished into the mountains. What remains consistent across sources is a moment when the web closed. Guards came with warrants or with torches. A house was searched. Names once safe in memory became evidence on a table. Whether the capture was public or quiet, the result was the same. The story moved from rumor into civic procedure, and with it the opportunity for narrative control. If a trial occurred, records are thin and complicated by power. The court, when it convened, had to read not only the acts themselves, but also the smell of scandal that hung over property and status. Witnesses were reluctant, testimonies contradictory. Legal counsel argued about intent, about the technicalities of furnace use and the plausibility of accidental deaths. Whether the court pronounced guilt, sentenced escape, or concocted a compromise, the public outcome was less important than the lesson learned. The colony preferred an explanation that preserved public order, and yet even in a verdict that soothed the elites, the stories persisted underground. For years, the official archive remained at odds with the oral ledger. Families buried names in private plots. Songs changed lines. A once minor rhyme transformed into a caution. Modern historians who later combed the archives found fragments. A coroner's note here, a ledger entry there, a family letter describing sudden misfortune. The task of disentangling fact from fiction is laborious and ethically charged. It requires respect for both documents and for the human memory that kept the story alive despite official silence. What does the story of Esperanza's furnace mean now? It resists tidy moralizing. For some, it is a tale of resistance and a desperate answer to a world that offered neither hearing nor remedy. For others, it is a caution about the corrosive effects of vengeance. The most useful interpretation may be pragmatic, to ask how systems allowed harm to accumulate, and what communities can do to prevent escalation. Historical reckoning is less about deciding who to praise and more about changing structures so that people do not feel driven to irreversible acts. Stories like Esperanza's are hard to place on tidy pedestals. They move us because they insist on complexity. Victims and agents can be the same person in different hours. Our duty as listeners and as historians is not to condense the story into certainty, but to hold the tension, to name wrongs, and to imagine better systems of reckoning. If this episode unsettled you, that unease is useful. Let it push you to ask, who bears our city's quiet? Who counts these losses? Subscribe for more stories where history tests our ethics. Ask for the source list in the comments, and we'll publish archival references and reading notes.